Everyone assumes that if they were in the wrong career, they would know. It would feel dramatic, a crisis, a breakdown, a moment where everything suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. But that's almost never how it actually happens. The wrong career usually looks completely fine from the outside. The salary keeps growing and the titles keep getting more senior. And yet something can still feel off. You can't quite explain it, and a question starts to appear more often than you'd like. And the question is this actually the right path for me? If you've ever had that thought, this video is for you. Because I'm going to walk you through 4 signals that many successful professionals experience when they're in the wrong career. And most people ignore them for years, until sometimes it's too late. Here's something I've noticed after more than 2 decades in senior leadership. First as a partner at one of the world's largest professional services firms, and now working with senior leadership teams across a range of different industries. Most careers are not designed, they're assembled. You took the role that seemed prestigious. You followed the path that your peers were on. You chose the field that seemed stable. And then you turned out to be good at it. So you kept going. The promotions came, the salary grew, your reputation strengthened, and for a long time, that formula works. But eventually, usually somewhere in your late 30s or 40s, people begin asking themselves a question that they've been too busy to ask before. Not, am I successful? But, is this actually something I want to be successful at? Because it's often the case that you become extremely good at something that was maybe never quite right for you in the first place. So let's walk through the 4 signs that I see again and again among capable people who eventually realize they're in the wrong career. The first sign is all about the Sunday dread that never really lifts. And before we go into this one, I just want to acknowledge something, because it's easy to dismiss. Everyone has stressful weeks, everyone has days where they just don't feel like going to work. That's not what I'm talking about here. The sign that I'm describing here is different. It's when Sunday evening anxiety becomes your baseline, when the week hasn't even started yet, but you're already bracing yourself for it. Here's what this looks like. You spend part of your weekend mentally preparing for Monday, and even the good weeks still feel like they cost you something. You find yourself counting down to holidays, not because you're excited about the trip per se, but because you need the escape. So why does this happen? Well, there's a concept that I come back to with the leaders that I work with, and it's about energy alignment. Work that fits you generates energy. It creates curiosity, engagement, and momentum. But work that doesn't fit you creates the opposite: fatigue, resistance, and this kind of like low-grade drain that never fully switches off. And when your natural strengths and the demands of your role are misaligned, you're essentially working against yourself every day. And that friction compounds over time. This isn't laziness. In fact, the people who experience this most strongly are often the most driven professionals. Sunday dread isn't a motivation problem, it's a fit problem. So if you think this might apply to you, the question to ask yourself is, do you finish your best weeks feeling energized or just simply relieved that they're over? Sign 2 is when you're performing a different version of yourself at work. So if sign 1 felt familiar, this one will probably land even harder. There's a big difference between adapting your style to a situation, which I think we all need to do, and performing an entirely different personality that isn't actually yours. So here's what this looks like. You adopt a persona at work. Maybe you're hyper-analytical or relentlessly upbeat or aggressively commercial. And it works. People respond well to it. But at the end of the day, you feel a very specific kind of exhaustion. Not physical tiredness, but mental exhaustion. And then you go home and suddenly feel like a different person again. A bit lighter, more natural, more like yourself. And that gap between who you are at work and who you are everywhere else is the sign. So why does this happen? Well, many professional environments reward a very specific archetype: the aggressive deal maker, the hyper-rational strategist, or the relentlessly confident leader. And if that archetype doesn't fit you naturally, you can still succeed, but the job becomes a performance rather than an expression of who you are. You're acting a role that you've been cast in. I experienced this for myself. For years, I played the role of always being decisive and certain, the person who walked into client meetings with complete authority, didn't want to show any doubt, and had a clear answer for everything. And it worked. People trusted me and I got results. But it wasn't really me. I'm a naturally more reflective person, someone who thinks carefully, who finds real energy in honest conversations. And the persona that I built was a slightly flattened, harder version of who I actually was. And the thing was, I hadn't even noticed how much energy it was costing me until I stopped doing it. And when I did, people close to me kept saying the same thing: "You seem different." And what they meant was, I seemed more like myself again. And by the way, if you're recognizing yourself in some of these signs, I want to say something before we go any further. Don't panic and don't be too hard on yourself. Almost every leader I've worked with has been exactly where you are right now. often further into their career than they'd like to admit before they stopped and paid attention to some of these things. So the fact that you're watching this, that something in these signs feels familiar, that's not a problem. That's actually the beginning of something, which is exactly why the next two signs matter so much. So sign 3 is where work takes all your energy and leaves none for the rest of your life. The first two signs are subtle. This one is much harder to explain away. This is where your career consumes your life rather than supporting it. And by the time you finish work, you've got nothing left. Not for relationships, not for hobbies, not for the things that used to energize you. Your weekends become more about recovery rather than restoration, and your family gets the leftover version of you. The mistake people make here is assuming that this is simply a workload problem, but it's something else entirely. Because when your work generally fits who you are, workload won't drain you in the same way. Yes, you'll work hard, yes, you'll have demanding weeks, but the work itself generates a form of energy, that curiosity, that momentum, a sense of forward movement. When work only takes and never gives back, that's the problem. I fully recognize this situation for myself. I still work long hours running my professional development business. Not dissimilar to the long hours that I used to work when I was a partner at KPMG, but the mental space that those hours take up is so different, both in terms of my enjoyment of the work and the excitement that I have about what I'm building. So I can now work long hours, I have tough weeks, and I still want to do more, and I'm motivated for what's next. And that impacts how I show up outside of work with my family and my friends. So the question to ask yourself here is whether the version of you that shows up outside of work is someone you're proud of, or has your career solely colonized the rest of your life? Just a quick request, if you're enjoying this video, please be sure to give it a like, maybe even a comment, and perhaps subscribe to my channel, because let's face it, you're unlikely to go into YouTube and search for my name because you probably can't even pronounce it or remember what it is. The fourth sign is when you're optimizing for safety instead of growth. Now, this last sign is the most important and the most uncomfortable because it doesn't feel like a problem. It feels like you're being sensible. Here's what it looks like. You stay because the salary is excellent, because the title looks good, and because your next step feels obvious, and also because leaving would feel risky. But internally, if you're really honest with yourself, something has changed. You're not building something anymore, you're protecting something. So why does this happen? Well, this is what I call career drift. You've invested 10, 15, 20 years, you've got credibility, a network, a reputation, and walking away from that feels like throwing something away. So instead, you just keep climbing, which leads to a realization that many leaders eventually have, which is they've been climbing a ladder and discovering partway up that it's leaning against the wrong wall. You can climb faster, you can climb higher, but every rung is still taking you further away from where you actually want to be. So the solution isn't climbing harder, it's stopping long enough to ask whether this is even the right ladder. And again, I had this realization for myself when I decided to leave my high-paying job at KPMG and start my own professional development business. I had a great career at KPMG, and I'd recommend the firm to anyone, but I now know that my ladder is definitely leaning against the right wall for who I am now. So the question to ask yourself here is, are you building the career you actually want? Now, before we wrap up, I want to say something directly. Being in the wrong career is not a failure. Almost every person that I've worked with who reaches this realization got there the same way. Early decisions made without full self-knowledge, success in roles that didn't quite fit, and then momentum carrying them forward before they ever had a chance to ask the right questions. These signs, the Sunday dread, the performance, the emptiness, the safety seeking, they're not character flaws, they're feedback. They're the information that your career is giving you now. And the people who make the most meaningful changes in the second half of their careers are the ones who stop treating those signals as problems to avoid and start treating them as data to act on. Now, if you recognize yourself in any of these 4 signs, the most important thing you can do right now is start asking better questions. Not how do I get out of this, but what does the right next chapter actually look like for me? And if that sounds like you, I've got something for you that will help you. Click the link in the description below, and I promise you, you'll find it's worth your time. Take a quick look now.